introduction, maintain why I wrote the book, and
All right. Good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing today? Thank you all so much for coming out to Busboys and Poets Brooklyn today. Let's go ahead and do a big round of applause for you guys for making it out. Yeah. Now, today we have two really special guests to talk about something someone my age grew up with all around the news. And for those of you who are older, it's been the center of your adulthood as a U.S. resident, citizen, what have you. Today we're going to learn about the insider detailed account of how a Pentagon cabal strategy, don't know what that is, that's okay. We're going to learn today to manipulate intelligence, pressure the UN, and force a congressional authorization for the use of force through political threats and scare the American people after 9/11 into supporting an attack on Iraq. Pretty big chapter in our American history, and we have insiders to tell us more and all about. Today we are celebrating Deadly Betrayal, authored by a Pentagon insider and senior enlisted leader of nearly 3 decades standing, Command Chief Master Sergeant, retired, Dennis Fritz. Dennis Fritz is a former Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant who retired from active duty in August of '03 after 28 years of honorable active duty service. He held 2 of the Department of Defense's highest enlisted positions, and during active duty service, he had 2 assignments at the Pentagon, which including serving as an executive officer to General Buster Glosson, the Director of Legislative Affairs, Office of the Secretary of the Air Force. Sorry, this is a very long bio because we have a very distinguished guest here today. He is currently the director of the Eisenhower Media Network. Joining him today in conversation is Larry Wilkerson, who is a distinguished visiting professor of government and public policy at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, from 2005 to 2022. Prior to his professorship, he was Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, a name we're all familiar with. He served 31 years in the U.S. Army, with his final military assignment being Special Assistant to then Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Colin Powell, and later Deputy Director and Director of the U.S. Marine Corps War College at Quantico. Today, he's a Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and co-founder with Major General Dennis Light, the USAR retired, of the All-Volunteer Force Forum. Together, we have a lot of knowledge here on stage. So let's put our listening caps on and get ready for the Q&A at the end, because I'm sure folks will have a thing or two to say. And without further ado, let's go ahead and give our guests on stage a round of applause.
well, I think I'll get this party started. I want to first do some house cleaning here. I started the initial kickoff of the book in New York City on Monday, and I made a drastic mistake. I failed. Okay, all right. I'll continue. Can you hear me okay? I seem to have a loud voice anyhow. But RGI Productions, I want to thank them for being here today, setting up all the cameras. Some of you may have seen it on Facebook streaming live last week from New York. and that was done by the RG Live production crew. Let's give them a hand. I would also like to take this time and thank each and every one of you for being here. As I made my way around the room, reminiscing and meeting and seeing so many of you, it brought back fond memories. It was also great to meet new people and just to chat with you and see what made you come today. And so I'm excited about you have a need to know, and I'm happy about that. I'm also happy to say, Andy, thank you. Andy agreed to host us today. Andy is the owner of Busboys and Poets, and it is an honor to be here today, and I really thank you for hosting us today. Now, as I stated in New York, and as I've stated everywhere I've gone, you can never go anywhere, whether that individual is with you or not with you. I will not make a mistake and not recognize my beautiful wife, Deborah, who's here. Now, I always tell this story and she gets upset at me, but it was years ago, someone mentioned to me that, hey, when I introduced that individual to Deborah, he said, man, what did you do? Did you marry her at 13? And I've been somewhat self-conscious about that, so I'm always quick to say that, hey, we're only 2 years apart. She just has great genes. But Larry, he said, hey, it's okay. Hey, I'm from South Carolina. I married my wife at 16. And so I feel a little better now. Also, I just want to recognize my son, DJ, who's here with us, and this beautiful lady, Lauren. She's probably surprised I've been to this. Hey, Lauren, she just came in today. In fact, her train was 45 minutes late. And then my heart, I'm not embarrassed to admit, my daddy's girl, Amber, who flew in from Atlanta. Now, I do not want to go out around the room. I have a host of family members that are here, and I'm so glad they were able to join us. And as some of you have seen, I've made my way around the room. I have so many co-workers that are here that I could recognize, and I do, so please forgive me, but there's just some stories I must tell before we get started, because we'll get started on this book here in a moment, but it's just so great to see so many of you. And as I look around the room, you know, I think about a couple of, and I hope they don't get embarrassed for me mentioning this, but I have a couple of GO friends that are here that I want to talk about just for a moment. The first being General Ted Mercer, and please raise your hand. And the reason I want to mention General Ted Mercer, he is one of the individuals that first approached me years ago about writing a book. Now, it may not have been the book he wanted me to write, but I had to do this one. I thought this was a priority, but later I will write the book that he suggested that I write, and it's a book about my life, because I had an unusual enlisted career. And I will write that book as well, but I thought it was more important for me to write this one first. I also want to recognize General Hopper. The story about General Hopper, he followed me around for years. General Hopper was the CEO of the Air Force Aid Society, and that was a charity organization to help, and some of you probably, especially some first sergeants in the room here and former chiefs, probably know about the Air Force Aid Society. That was our Air Force charity, as we called it, and General Hopper is a former CEO. And he approached me years ago, and I say years, a decade ago, and said, Chief, I want you on our board. And because we really don't have any enlisted representation other than the active duty Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. You know, I thought he was kidding. I thought he was just being nice. And okay, yes, sir, I'll do it one day. And then I got a call from a General Gregory. And she was retiring. She was one of the top FM, which means finance experts in the Air Force. And she said, Chief, I want to join the Air Force Aid Society, but General Hopper tells me that I can't join unless I drag you along with him. And that's when I realized he was serious about that, and I called him, and for over a decade, I sat on the board for the Air Force Aid Society. So, General Hopper, I want to thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Also, now, an unusual person I want to recognize, and you're probably, oh, why is that? You know, as we get older, my wife and daughter and a pastor once reminded me, and I guess I better be careful when I say this, because some of you in this room could probably appreciate what I'm about to say, was that you're the last to know. And what do you mean by the last to know? Well, I was the last to know that I was losing some hair. And my barber, Lee, where are you? I call him the doctor. Lee has been cutting my hair for over 40-something years. In fact, he gave me, one thing I forgot to mention too, when I'm about to say this, he gave me my wedding haircut. And oh, by the way, Deb and I have been married for over 41 years, and so I forgot to mention that earlier. But Lee gave me my wedding haircut, and Lee, for over those many years, had never, not once, given me a bad haircut. But there was one time I thought he did. I called Lee up because I kept looking in the mirror and said, man, one side on my top, it's not even. And so I called Lee up and said, Lee, he said, come on in, Mr. Fritz. I'll take care of you. And what I didn't know, my hair was thinning, and it was losing, and he's such a professional, he didn't have the heart to tell me. And the reason I want to recognize him now, I go to him every other week, and I say, Lee, I know you're a professional, but do whatever you can to save what little hair I have left. And he's done it every single time. So I just wanted to recognize him as well. Now, for all of you in the room, I value you, I appreciate you, and I thank you for being here today. Now, let's get to what we're all here for. I've been asked on a number of occasions, why did I write the book? And I know we're going to have a question and answer session after this, but I just want to take a quick poll here. For those who have not read the book, I know a number of you have read the book already, and some have not, and some may purchase today. But is there anybody, let's don't talk about oil, don't say anything about oil. Can anybody in the room tell me why in 2003 did we go to war in Iraq? Anybody? Say again? Yeah, we know it was a lie. Yeah, exactly. But what other reason? Anybody? Weapons of mass destruction, which we know was a lie. All, okay? Anybody else? So everybody in this room, nobody in this room can tell me why we went to war in Iraq. Okay. Now, why do I ask that? That is a shame. That is a shame. We had 4,500 military men and women to die in a war that nobody can tell me why we went. Even today, you may have ideas. Now, what really struck me is that I went around to different military installations. Here, now called Joint Base Anacostia Andrews, Bowling, Joint Base Andrews, Walter Reed, Fort Belvoir. My hometown of Fayetteville, North Carolina, I went to Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty. I had soldiers, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard, Army, soldiers. Why did we go to war? None of them could tell me. I don't know if that individual's here, but I know there's an individual that was planning to be here. I even asked her, she worked along with me, and I asked her, well, why did you go to Iraq? Why did you go to war? And she looked me in the eye and said, Chief, I don't know why. And I can tell you a story that as I was deployed and helping some individuals, it was a medevac helicopter, and I was ducking for cover, and I kept asking, well, today is Sunday, I better not say it, where are those WMDs? Just imagine what she said, though. And that struck me. I said, it is a shame that so many men and women of our armed forces that deployed, 4,500 lost their lives and over 100,000 wounded for life, and they did not know why we went to war. That started me to thinking. And then what really drove me over the edge is that one day I was walking in the Pentagon, where I met my wife from 41 years ago, who wouldn't give me the time of day, by the way. It took me over a year. I chased her down, and I really mean that. And she said, "Oh, don't tell that story." But I thought I was a cool guy, and my line to her was, "You know what? I'll marry you right now." And she looked at me and walked away and said, "You don't even know me." And I went for over a year, walking the halls of the Pentagon, and saying, "Oh my goodness, that lady could not stand me, and I couldn't take it anymore. And finally, one day, I saw her, and I said, you know what? You can't stand me, can you? And she said, no, it wasn't that. You approached me the wrong way. But I'm here today to say, 41 years later, I guess I was right. So anyway, But anyway, I was walking on in the halls of the Pentagon, and I saw a group of joint service members. Some were missing arms, some were missing legs, some had patches around their eyes, and it saddened me. And you'll see this in the book. I walked up to one of the individuals and asked, how are you doing? And this individual looked at him and said, I'm making it, I'm hanging in there. And I saw a young man look as though he was maybe 20 years old. And he was in a wheelchair, missing a leg, had a patch over his eye, which I assume he was missing an eye. And I walked up to him and said, how are you doing, young man? He said, I'm hanging in there, I'm not doing well. And he strolled away. And that broke my heart. And I realized at the time I was working in what we call the declassification review team, where I had been selected on a special team to go through every pre-planning war document in the Pentagon that allegedly justified the war. And I said, here it is, I'm in a room of history. Why not tell that history if nobody else does? And thank you. And that's why I did that, on behalf of the men and women of our military services. And I also there's many veterans in here, but I know there's some folks that work with me. After a while, I left the Pentagon, and that came from me. Before the war started, I used to work for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a guy by the name of General Myers. And before the war started, I reached out to him, and I reached out to my boss at that particular time. Growing up in North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina to be exact, home of Fort Bragg, as I mentioned earlier, now Fort Liberty, I saw the returning soldiers from the Vietnam War, and I saw how they were impacted by that war. I saw the wounds. I felt that I saw the invisible wounds. I had 2 family members that suffered from the invisible wounds that we now call PTSD, that you've all of you heard about. And I remember telling them, if we go to war, I hope we don't have veterans coming back like what happened to them in Vietnam after the war. They were forgotten. And you saw many of them homeless on the streets, and I saw plenty of that in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I challenged my bosses about that. And so back in 2007, there was a Washington Post story talking about the treatment of our war wounded at Walter Reed. And you probably won't believe this, but I hope some of you had heard about it, but if not, I'll tell you about it. We were bringing back wounded warriors and putting them in molded rooms. And I just thought that was just terrible. The Washington Post wrote a story about that, and when I heard about it, I just went up in the ceiling. I just couldn't believe it. And after that story, a program was created to support our war wounded. And one of my former bosses, who I talked to about we better take care of our troops when they come back, reached out to me and said, hey, Chief, we think we may have a job for you. And I had an opportunity to go over to Walter Reed and support our Air Force Wounded Warriors, and then somehow I guess I did a pretty good job. I ended up working with the Army on their Wounded Warrior program, first as a contracted deputy program manager, then program manager. And then I don't know, if Sandra Mason, are you here yet? I know she was coming. Oh, there you are. I had a seat for you. I mean, everybody should give that lady an applause. I'll tell you why. Sandra Mason, please do. Now, why I say that, Sandra and I first met in 2008, and we were putting together the program to provide advocates for all our war wounded after that 2007 Washington Post story. And Sandra and I worked very closely for years until I think the last 4 years of my career with the Wounded Warrior program. I worked alongside of her as the contracted program manager for the Department of Defense's Wounded Warrior program. We called it something else, Sandra, so don't beat me up about it, recovery care program, recovery coordination program. But for everybody here, it was the Wounded Warrior program. And we did a great job of taking care of our war wounded. And I want to thank you, Sandra. And the reason I mentioned that, there are some others in here that work with me. Would you all please stand up? I know I see Bryce there. there's a couple others. For those that work with the Wounded Warrior Program, would you please stand? There's Leonard, Therese, yes. And these folks, they worked extremely hard in taking care of our war wounded. And I used to tell anybody that worked with the war wounded that they were doing God's work. They were doing God's work in taking care of our war wounded. So that was the reason why I wrote the book. When I was at the Pentagon and saw all these war wounded, and I said, sadly, they don't know why they went to war. Now, I have a gentleman sitting here next to me, and one of the things I used to do and how we met was, Sandra, I could have been fired early on in the Wounded Warrior Program because anytime a member of Congress came through on their so-called, let's go and support the Wounded Warriors, they would walk out of a room, and I'll let Larry tell you one of his experiences. They would walk out of the room and say, thank you for your service. And that broke my heart. If an individual was missing an arm, a leg, in some cases, brain, and for a member of Congress to walk out of that room and say, thank you for your service. Larry have a story, and I'll let him tell that, but that was disappointing to me as well. And so I used to tell every member of Congress that came through there that this is the result of a war that you supported and voted for. This is that result. Now, I must tell you, I must have got to there because of the fact no one ever complained. No one ever complained. But I wanted them to know this is the result of a war that was based on a lie. Larry Wilkerson, as you heard, he worked for Colin Powell many years. And Larry was one of the first individuals out of the Bush administration to come out and say, hey, we let the American people down. He was disappointed in what he, and I hate to say it, his role in the Bush administration of the war in Iraq. And when I saw that, I was happy. I reached out to Larry. I said, you don't know who I am. This was back in maybe 2010 or maybe, I don't know, but it was that far back. It's been years now. And I said, you can Google me, and you'll realize that I'm legit. And I want to invite you over to Walter Reed so you can see the result of that war. And I'll let Larry jump in and talk about that, and then maybe give an orientation, and we'll talk a little bit more about the book, and then as Larry will say, and I'll let him say that about you all asking questions. I may have talked too long, but I want to take one at a time and recognize another individual. I'm so happy to be here because I see her out in the streets, and I really mean in the streets all the time. After I mention this individual's name, I want you all to go out to TikTok. Let me tell you, I'm a TikTok nut too. I'm an old guy, but I'm a TikTok nut. One of the guys, Larry and I are part of what we call the Eisenhower Media Network, and through Larry, he got me into that, and I don't know how. Like in Moses, I said, why me? I became the director of the Eisenhower Media Network. But anyhow, there's a lady here, and I want y'all to go out to TikTok. I want you to Google her. I want you to go out to any social media platform. Medea, I'm going to embarrass you. Would you please stand? Now, for those of you who don't know why you're clapping, Medea, my goodness, she is a hero. She is a legend. When you go out and Google her, when you go out to TikTok, any social media, you will see her in the face of every member of Congress she can come across and challenge them about the wars in the past and what is going on now. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about that because whether you believe in what's going on now in Gaza, it's a disgrace. And this book was the first stage of what's going on right now, and I'll talk about that later. But I want to turn this over to Larry and let him tell you how we came together and his feelings and so forth about the book, and we'll be open to any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Dennis gave you the preface for how we met. We went into the brand new, and it is really nice, facility at what is now called the National Military Medical Center at Walter Reed. That's the way the military does things, a 4-mile-long name. And we sat down in the lobby of what is really the reception center. And Dennis introduced me to some Marines and some airmen and some soldiers, and we had coffee down there. Well, these Marines and these airmen and these soldiers were all missing at least one appendage. As Dennis indicated, maybe they had a patch over one eye where an eye was missing or badly damaged. But the one that stuck in my mind vividly was, at that time, I think, the only triple amputee that the Air Force had ever suffered in all of its history. And he was missing both legs at the knees, or maybe a little higher, and his right arm all the way from the elbow down. You look at him and you think, I'll bet you any amount of money that if he told me the truth, and he would later, he wished he'd bled out on the battlefield and died and had not survived. And that's what a lot of these people would tell you in their rawest, truest moments. But the story he told me that sticks in my mind and will always stick in my mind, which Dennis referred to, was he got a little bit of a snicker on his face, and he asked me if I wanted to hear about the congressman who'd just come up to his room to thank him for his service. He was lying in his bed. Back up a little bit, the Air Force had been really good and brought his wife up from Florida. She was a third grade elementary school teacher, as I recall, and she had been able to stay near him at Walter Reed through 19 surgeries, as I remember, 19 surgeries. So he had that helpmate with him, and she was a remarkable woman to stay through all of this, because I can tell you that a lot of these guys and gals lose their spouse afterwards because it's so difficult living with someone who has this kind of problem. Well, he said that the congressman came into my office with his little staff entourage, and the very first words out of his mouth, I'm lying there in my bed, the very first words out of his mouth were, as typical with Americans who have no skin in the game whatsoever, in this case, had the skin in the game that they were partly responsible for sending him to the war zone, thanked him for his service, and he said very quickly, don't thank me for my service. Thank me for my sacrifice, which you can plainly see. The congressman looked at him, turned on his heels, left the room, and this young airman said, that's the best moment I've had since I was wounded. And he probably felt that he finally got, some gravitas back at these people who sent him to war. 2 tours he had, and he was finishing up his second tour and disarming an IED, an improvised explosive device, which became the enemy's main weapon in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And it exploded. And so he lost his legs and his arm. But it had some positive aspects to it too. Later we went back and we saw him again, and he was driving a van. He had gotten a van especially designed and built and paid for by a donor that he could drive. It had all the accoutrements and so forth, so he could manipulate the throttle and do the steering wheel and such, so he could drive. So he looked like he was getting a hold of his life, what was left of it, and he was going to be all right. And I want to comment again that the most remarkable thing to me, and I was married for 55 years to the same woman until she died of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, so I understand this. He had a wife, a spouse, who stayed with him and loved him and cherished him and cared for him. And just to give a kudo to Central Command, whoever did this at Central Command down in Tampa, they assured him of a job in an administrative capacity for as long as he wanted it, and she went back to teaching at the elementary school where she was teaching. And so that's the way we should take care of our warriors, but let me tell you quickly, hastily, and sadly, that is not the way we take care of our warriors normally, and I attribute a lot of that attention to this man right here.
Let me add to that story also before we go any further. When we notified his wife, she was 7 months pregnant. And during one of his surgeries, she was delivering on one floor, and he was having another surgery on the other. And that one sticks with me as well because I remember, man, I had many tears on this, working with the Wounded Warriors. And I remember him telling me that, Chief, I'll never be able to hold my baby in my arms. And that tore me up. And so he needs to know why that he was asked to go to war. And that's why I thought it was important to do that. Now, I can go through, and summarize it, but real fast, I'll just say, why I did it? Some of the reasons that we went to war, you said it was about oil, it was not. Well, let me just take this, because Larry will probably jump on me about this. I will tell you that oil was a subset. But in order to get to the oil portion of it, you had to get to their major objective.
But it was not oil for ExxonMobil, Total, or any of the big petroleum companies. It was oil for Israel.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Yes, exactly. It was oil for Israel. But in order to get there, we had some folks that have been planning this for years. It goes all the way back to the 90s, to what we call the PNAC, Project for the New American Century. And these individuals were planning this all the way back to the 90s. And it's about Americans' imperialism, to actually take over the Middle East and, quite frank with you, the world. And this is not conspiracy, this is real, okay? And what really burns me up is that we in the military was going to be used as pawns in this. Some of us don't like to hear that, but I'm just giving you facts. And, as I would tell folks, sometimes I can give you opinions, I can give you my assumption, and I can give you some facts. So these folks came in January of 2001 with the goal of going to war in the Middle East. And then after that, anybody else that stood in the way, to include Russia, as we're seeing right now. All this ties in. Now, I don't have no respect for this individual, so I'm going to call him Bibi, the Prime Minister of Israel right now. What is happening right now in Gaza? He's always wanted to do that. Always. He wanted to go in and destroy Gaza and take it over. But back then, the Bush administration, they had a different plan. They said, we cannot go in like that. As you see what's happening, all the killings that are happening right now, children, which Medea fights each and every day on the Hill, who's supporting this, providing the money for the weapons. Medea's on the Hill every day, challenging any member of Congress, asking them, how can we support this? Bibi wanted to do that for years, for decades. But the Bush administration had a better idea. They knew that we could not take the disagreements, the frustrations that are happening around the world right now with what we're doing. They knew that. And so what they decided to do is that instead of going in directly, we're going to take out those countries that support the Palestinians militarily, and those factions, which you've heard a lot about, Hamas and Hezbollah. At the time, Saddam in Iraq, Iran and Syria, Assad in Syria, were supporting them. And the goal was to take them out and to take over the country. Now, what stopped that was when we got into Iraq, you heard about a thing called the insurgency. If it wasn't for the insurgency, we were headed to Syria next, and then Iran. Now, they knew the American people and the world would not support that. And so from January, from the time they got into office, they were looking at any excuse they could find to go to war with Iraq. Why did they pick Iraq first? Well, under the Clinton administration, we had what we called the regime change policy under the Clinton administration. But President Clinton didn't carry through with that. In And so when the Bush administration came in, they said it made us look weak. We're going to carry through with it. But we cannot go to war based on we want to do a regime change. So we got to come up with some excuse. And so they went around and around trying to find excuses, which you will read in there. I'm not going to give it all away. Somebody said, Fritz, don't give your book away. And so you're going to read about what excuses they came up trying to go to war. But sadly and unfortunately, as I stated earlier, I'm not into conspiracy theories. I only give facts when I know them. I'll give you an opinion and assumption. But you can take this to the bank as a fact. As sad and as bad as 9/11 was, there were some in the Bush administration glad it happened because it gave them an excuse to go to war. Why? Because allegedly, Saddam and Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And we can scare the American people into supporting a war in the Middle East out of fear, as you heard yourselves, that another 9/11 could happen. Now, what bothers me is that they lied, and we in the military were used as pawns in those agendas. That was truly, it was not about our national defense. It was about an agenda to take over the Middle East on behalf of Israel. It was an agenda to show that we were the only superpower. And finally, believe it or not, and you'll see in the book, some things I quoted their own words. Some have heard it was about democracy. But I will tell you, President Bush truly believed in democracy. His hope was that if we could take over those countries and put in our own governments of our liking, and they were democratized, then we could have peace. Not for us, but for Israel. President Bush truly believed democracy was the way. Larry can talk more about this, but Bush was inexperienced in foreign policy. So he let people that you read about in the book, and I'm just so shocked how we allow some of them on television, like John Bolton, for example, who's a crook. And we allow them on the CNNs of the world nowadays to talk about, how strong and powerful and dominant our military should be to control the world. But these individuals had agendas, not about our national defense, but about controlling the world. Larry, anything?
Let me add a really powerful story, I think, to this. I don't know if I've told you this story.
And we have conversations all the time.
Colin Powell was really angry with George Tenet, the director of Central Intelligence and the principal interlocutor he had for putting together the UN presentation he gave on 5 February 2003, which polls afterwards showed convinced a majority of the American people that the war was justified. The whole time we were out at Langley at CIA headquarters, he and I were locked together almost like Siamese twins in a battle against George Tenet and his deputy, Machiavellian deputy, John McLaughlin, whom now you can find on CNN. He gets paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to advise CNN. Powell, the third day, was really angry about the connections they were asserting between Al-Qaeda, the people who'd attacked the towers, and Saddam Hussein. It really was flimsy. And he knew that that was the most powerful message to the American people, connecting Saddam Hussein with 9/11. So he took his anger out on me one day, something he hadn't done in 12 years of working with him. He grabbed me, he slammed me down in a chair, and he said, "Close the door." We were in the National Intelligence Council spaces, which are quite vast, and chairs everywhere, and conference tables, and he sat me down, and he sat down, and he said, "We're alone in here, right?" And I said, "Well, it is the CIA, boss." He didn't take the joke very well. He said a few choice words, and Powell rarely used profanity, but he said a few choice words about this blankety blank connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. It didn't stand up. It was hogwash. It was just pure make-believe. I think he thought I was going to protest. I didn't. I said, boss, let's take it out. Got a bright look on his face. He said, how hard will that be to do? I said, well, Lynn Davidson was putting together the script. I said, I'll tell Lynn to take it out. She's been working her fanny off, but I'm going to tell her to take it out. Good, do it. So I went to Lynn and I told her to take everything in the script out that connects Saddam Hussein with Al-Qaeda. Well, I didn't note, stupid me, that John McLaughlin was leaning against the door jamb. I looked over my shoulder and I saw him just as he disappeared. Now, I should have put two and two together, but I didn't. So we went back into the DCI conference room to resume the fairly rudimentary rehearsal at that time. And Powell was talking to the analysts who were briefing him, and Tenet got up and left. Tenet is sitting to Powell's right, I'm sitting to his left. And I had told George Tenet, you don't leave when the Secretary of State is in this room. And that was what Powell told me to tell him, and I told him. So I was angry immediately that he was leaving while the Secretary was spending his precious time there to get ready for this presentation and only had 5 days and nights to do it. So I'm just about to get up and go find out where old George is and beat him around the head and ears, and he walks back in. And he sits down, and I will never forget this. I understood every word he said, and the words will never leave my head. He said, Mr. Secretary, we have just learned from questioning of an Al-Qaeda high-level operative of contacts between the Mukhabarat, the secret police that Saddam Hussein had, and Al-Qaeda, to include training Al-Qaeda in the use of chemical and biological weapons. Well, Powell turned to me and he said, LW, put it all back in. That's just one story about the lies that we were told by the head of the American Intelligence Agency and all of his cronies. Lies that were clear lies in August and September of that year, after Powell and I had a chance to look at just what George Tenet and John McLaughlin had done to us. Now think about that for a moment. That's your intelligence service. That's your government doing exactly what this man told you they were doing, building a lousy, false case for killing young American men and women.
Let me share something else with you, too. Colin Powell was in the dark because they created their own intel cell in the Pentagon. For those of you that follow foreign policy and know the history of this, and I put that in the book as you'll probably read, I said I wrote this for all audiences. You know, those that were familiar with foreign policy and those that are not. I'll give an example. There's no better joy, and I'm going to embarrass her a little bit, when my daughter called me after she read the book and said, Dad, you know, I heard about all of these things, heard about Iran, heard about Iraq, Syria, Israel, but I never connected this. I never understood it. And that brought joy to my heart because it's for that generation, that young generation to understand the history of how we got into this. And also, as I stated earlier, I wrote it for our military because, again, I'm going to emphasize this. We're the ones that are used as pawns in these lies and these special agendas. Powell, you don't mind if I say this, you know, went to his grave feeling that stain because all the way whether you're Republican or Democrat, people respected Powell. And he went to his grave feeling that stained my career. And that broke his heart. But they were keeping him in the dark. The DIA, for those of you that are in the military, Defense Intelligence Agency, was telling the Pentagon, who they work for, hey, there's no weapons of mass destruction. The most important thing you need to understand on this, too, is that they had no idea, didn't even know if they had weapons of mass destruction, but they were hoping they did. to justify it. Now, as we know, they did not have WMD, but they were going to find every reason. For those of you that follow foreign policy, they use this guy called Curveball, if you will. You know, he was supposed to be a special guy that the Germans, you know, and they told us that, you know, he wasn't a credible source. But we used him anyhow because of the fact, at all costs, the Bush administration, they were going to war, no matter what. Something else you're going to see in the book. The war could have been stopped. There was a person, Haji, I think he was a Lebanese businessman, but he was dual citizenship. And he was close to the Saddam regime. And he came to the Pentagon leadership and said, hey, listen, Saddam wants to negotiate. He'll give us anything we want. If it's oil that we want, he'll give us mining rights to the oil. Anything we want. He'll help in making peace with Israel. And they said no, because we wanted to go to war. There were two countries, France and Germany, that did not want to go to war, and they were trying to find every way they could to stop this war. They kept that from France and Germany. Why? Because they said if they found out that Saddam wanted to meet with us and stop the war, if Germany and France found out about that, they would do everything they could to stop it. So they kept that from Germany and France and everybody else. The only two countries that was kept apprised of what was happening in the war planning was Israel, of course, and then the UK. They were locked in hand with everything we wanted to do. Now, Larry, you know,
another story.
Go ahead,
About
please.
curveball.
We do this all the time, so we're having our telephone conversation or our breakfast that we have for
Powell and I never heard the term curveball.
Yeah.
All we heard was the BND, the German Intelligence Service, and they're running the agent. We didn't hear that no U.S. personnel had ever been present in the room when this source was questioned. That's a violation of all intelligence tradecraft. That should have been thrown out. But here's the kicker. We passed the script of the presentation around to all the station chiefs in the CIA for comment and corrections. Tyler Drumheller was the head of CIA for Europe. Tyler told me on the phone and in an email afterwards that he told George Tenet that the source was not reliable and that he told John McLaughlin, his deputy, that the source was a joke. McLaughlin said back to Tyler, quote, "The train is too far down the track. We can't pull it out now." End of quote.
That is true. There's no going back now. And 4,500 military men and women lost their lives. Over 100,000 or more wounded for life. And that does not include the number of Iraqis, innocent Iraqis, that were killed.
Over 100,000 of them.
Yeah. Now, Larry, you have this old saying, we've gone further. I had to start out by just reminiscing and saying hello to so many friends that are out there. But you have this, I forgot where you got the quote from about, you know, us talking too long and the question. What's that? Will you please say that?
Colin Powell said, never talk more than 20 minutes, you'll bore them.
And so I violated that already. And so what we want to do, the other part he added to that, leave the rest of that for questions by the audience. And I talked to a number of you. I know you have some questions. And so, hey, free will it. Larry and I will speak about as much as we can. And for those of you that are concerned, if you've seen the book, there's some black guys called redactions, okay? And so those redactions was about, because I worked in a highly secure area, I had to send my manuscript to the Pentagon for a review to make sure I wasn't saying certain things I shouldn't say and get it cleared and all that. So as you can see, maybe some more stories to tell with that, those redactions. I will tell you also that there are some that question why are those redactions there? And I probably could have had an opportunity to fight some of them, but I didn't because I wanted to get the book out. I wanted our veterans to see why they went to war, because I must warn you, and I hope you ask some of the questions, because I know I've talked to some of you and you're aware of this already. As I stated earlier, what's going on now ties in to what happened then. And if we don't watch ourselves, We will be in another war in the Middle East. You take that to the bank. You take that to the bank. We will be in another war in the Middle East that's not about the defense of our country. So what we're going to do now, we're going to give you
Can I say one other
Please
thing?
do. Please.
Please get a hold of George Tenet's book.
CIA.
Just look at it. You don't have to read it. It's that thick. It's that thick at the center of the storm. It does not have a single redaction in it.
CIA.
Get a hold of Douglas Feith's book, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who was an Israeli spy in the Pentagon. He'd been an Israeli spy in the Pentagon for Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan fired him and pulled his security clearance. But Donald Rumsfeld brought him back and reissued his security clearance. Get a hold of his book and read it. Not a single redaction.
I have a chapter about Douglas Feith, and that's what made me write the book. You heard the saying about, back then they were cherry-picking intel. Well, that's what gave me the information and knowledge to write my book. I was part of Doug Feith. I worked for him indirectly. I was part of the team that was cherry-picking the intel that we would declassify so Doug Feith could write his book and there'd be no redactions. And so that's what really got me too. And that's when I said, you know what? I'm going to write my own book. And that's what I did based on what I saw Doug Feith doing. I thought it was a disgrace, and I said, I'll write my own book. Now, something that Larry said, and I tell this all the time too. If you see this book, I don't know if Laurie's in here, I think they got about 25 copies, and when it came in the box, Laurie said, it can't be 25 or 27 copies of that book in there. It was so thin, but that was by design. A couple of you in this room, when I told you I was writing the book, said, please don't make it too big. I'm not going to read it. You're going to lose my, my attention. And so that was by design to make it a quick read. I went straight to the meat.
You only make it big when you have a lot of lies to tell.
Yeah. So in this book, it's compacted in there. You're going to find everything that you thought you knew, everything that you didn't know in this book telling you about the Iraq War. And I think it's important that everybody know about it. Now, we're going to stop right here and let you ask any questions. Hey, Laurie, how much time we have left? Like I said, I violated the rule already.
I'd say we have maybe 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, that's good. Wow, the hands are coming up. Mike is coming your way.
I want to hear from those people back there in the back right against the window.
Yeah, that's a joke now, mind you. But I keep looking and say, who are those people?
Sir, I don't remember your name, but this is for you and Chief Fritz. This book is the last 10 years of my military career. So I'm going to hold on to this and read it another time. Because unfortunately, right now, I work at NGA. And I was telling her, I have to call in sick tomorrow. Because all the things you talked about is what I have to listen to. I already decided I'm going to retire in January. But my spirit has taken me back to the past, the lies, and also what we're telling our soldiers and airmen, because I'm part of the J1 at NGA. So thank you for lighting a fire in me and letting me know that we keep repeating the same things. Just like our parents used to say, in the 40s it was like this, and now you're wearing the same outfit in the 80s. Well, this crap keeps happening, and I no longer want to be part of it. So thank you for opening my eyes.
Yeah. If I could make a quick comment about that, I originally had that in my book. You heard this old saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book too. Will I be successful? I don't know, but I'm trying to keep us from doing the same old thing again. Because like I said, mark my word, there are folks right now trying to get us in a war with Iran. That's why they keep saying, whether it be the Houthis, whether it be Hamas or Hezbollah, they keep using what you keep hearing Iran attached to it. That is why. They're planning right now to go to war with Iran.
Thanks a lot for your information. The U.S. attack to Iraq, it was, 23 years old, yeah? I'm wondering, what is the state of mind of American people that they think their superiority, that the military can go anywhere and not connecting those lines right? Connecting Syria, Libya, Yemen, Saudis, and all these connections then go back to Russia, then China. And they call all these countries, Palestine right now, they are terrorists. They are going to their country, they fight for their land, and they call them terrorists. And when we go to any discussion, they say, these terrorists?
Yeah. Can I
You
say
call them terrorists? I mean, I'm mindful.
That's information warfare. I give that example. I get asked that quite a bit. I want some of you in this room to think about this. Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist. Think about that. If you get into the political world, Democrats versus Republicans, the conservative Republicans, radicals. Think about that for a moment. It's to demonize you. We want to demonize anybody they think can come against us. I got to be quite frank with you, and you know this more than I know, Larry. Iran has approached us a number of times. They want to be friends with us. They helped us out during Afghanistan when we were trying to offer anything we wanted. They came to your boss, I don't know if you were aware of that, to say, hey, whatever we can do to help. You know what? The folks in the Pentagon said no. There's a chapter in there called the neocons. Read about the neocons. All they want is war and America's imperialism. That's all they want. But we suffer. We suffer. I want you all to think about this too. And this is why I wrote the book as well. It affects our economy. I have a friend of mine. We have this conversation all the time. He said, well, what are we going to do about America? What are we going to do about the black people and all that good stuff? The first thing we have to do is stop all this money that's going to these wars. The military-industrial complex. That's where the Eisenhower Media Network comes into play. If we stop all these wars and all the money that's going overseas, then we can do the social work to help people here. But a lot of it is arrogance. And I'm gonna give another example. Let me always say this. I served my country for 28 years. My dad served in the military. My daughter told me today, wow, Dad, DJ and I broke that stream there of being in the military. But that's okay, because I don't want y'all in the military right now. I'm gonna just be honest with you. Because of the fact I saw firsthand how we're used as pawns. But it's about being arrogant. And whether we like it or not, what I was going to say, I served for 28 years. I love my country. I've been around the world, and Deborah can tell you, wherever we were stationed, Philippines, Japan, I couldn't wait to get back to the United States of America. But however, I will tell you this, though. It does not stop me from talking about my United States of America when we do wrong. And I just give you an example. Just look at our history. When you talk about the Middle East, all these countries and so forth. Look what we did here. Think about the indigenous people here. Think about my ancestors. Okay, first of all, we take over this country, then you go get my ancestors and you bring them over here to do your work free. So that's the colonial mentality from Europe. Think about that. Listen, I want to tell you something else too. You know, somebody asked me, about writing this book, you think people get upset or do you think you'll be a traitor? I used to worry about that. I don't care anymore. I used to tell folks, if I'm speaking truth, you can be mad at me. I don't care if I'm speaking truth. And what I'm doing now is speaking truth. And I'm going to tell you something else. When we talk about Israel, we give them $3.7 billion a year and more, okay? We provide their weapon system to kill innocent women and children. Now, you have Medea back there. Medea, you still there? Now, how can she be demonized? You talk about being called radical and being called terrorist. You have a person, a member of Congress, called Medea a terrorist. And said she's what is that? That's information warfare because they feel so sick that they're supporting the killing of innocent women and children. And you're going to call a lady a terrorist or a terrorist lover because she's trying to question, why are you supporting the innocent killing of women and children? But those of us that are in the military right now, we were taught in basic military training, the law of armed conflict, the Geneva Convention. We don't bomb hospitals. We don't bomb schools. We don't bomb where people live. That is against the law. It's against international law. So how can we support that? I can tell you right now, those GOs, if they haven't left yet, they're probably mad at me, but I will tell you, we would be in jail if we were doing that. We would be in jail. And so, ma'am, you're right. It's about America's imperialism. It's a colonial mentality that was brought over here from Europe.
Hi, I'm Kathy Boylan, and while I'm listening to you, I I'm 81. When I was 24, I heard about the Berrigans and they burned the draft files during the Vietnam War to protect the people whose names were on those cards, and those young men never went to Vietnam. So that's how I started out. I vigil at the Pentagon every Monday morning from 7 to 8. I don't know if you ever walk by, but if you do, please come and stand in the free speech zone that the Pentagon has created for us to stand in. We can't stand at the doorway and hand out leaflets. But I just wanted to add, please read David Ray Griffin, who wrote 14 books on 9/11. Because every time I see an Air Force person, I say, why didn't the Air Force scramble the planes on 9/11? The answer is Mr. Rumsfeld was in charge of scrambling the planes a few months before 9/11, and he gave it back to NORAD and the Air Force the next day. So Kathy Boylan says, 9/11 was an inside job to lead to war. And then another lie, the United States has been in Iraq since 91. It's 34 years we've been there. And we got there by lying to Saddam in 90. In August of 90, he called our US ambassador, April Gillespie, ambassador to Iraq, and invited her in to a meeting. And he was complaining about Kuwait and the border dispute that they were having. And she assured Saddam Hussein that the United States had no interest in border disputes like yours with Kuwait. 8 days later, he invaded Kuwait. And what happened? He was Hitler. And we've got to get rid, and they lied. They said the Iraqi soldiers had taken all the babies out of incubators. Remember that lie? That was told by the Iraqi ambassador's daughter or niece or whatever she was, dressed as a nurse. So many lies. Vietnam was a lie. It's all a lie. So I think the best thing we can do is go to all the high schools. And you know what the government is doing now? They're automatically registering all the kids. They're not giving them an opportunity to say, oh yes, I will fight for you, or oh no, I won't. They're automatically, it's in the new bill. That's what they want to do. Men and women too. Men and women. So what we've got to do is tell everybody not to join the military, like you told your daughter. We've got to go to all the high schools. Please, that's what I think. Anyway, thank you.
I was waiting to see if Larry was going to say anything. Let me just make one comment about that. Since World War II, there's not been a war that was about our national defense. We were always chasing demons. We were always, Vietnam, the Korean War was about communism. We've got to demonize them. As we all know, the Iraq War was based on a lie, and we tried to go into Syria to say they had chemical weapons, if you will. That was all planned too. Iran, listen, let me just say this. If Iran wanted a nuclear weapon, they would have had it by now. Bibi Netanyahu's been saying they got a nuclear weapon within a week or so, if they wanted one. And also, by the way, as a historical perspective, we try to demonize everybody else. With the war in Ukraine going on right now, I want you to think about this for a moment. Larry, and along with a few others, we signed on to a letter back in May of last year. Think about this for a moment. And you saw a lot of this in the news here recently. If Russia or China had a deep military buildup in Canada, right on our border, or in Mexico, think about it, we lost our minds when Russia brought nuclear weapons to Cuba. So think about if we had that, if Russia did that right now, Mexico and Canada, we would lose our minds. Well, that's what we've been doing to Russia. That's exactly what we've been doing to Russia right now. And Putin told us we better not do that. And we're using Ukrainians. Their infrastructure is being destroyed daily. And you got people like Lindsey Graham that don't care. That's the best money we've ever spent. Those are his words, mind you. Best money we've spent.
No skin in the game either.
No skin in the game.
You're a coward.
Ukraine, their people are dying. Their infrastructure is being destroyed. Why are we doing that? Because we're fighting a proxy war with Russia so we can have America's imperialism. And that is a shame. None of our wars since World War II has truly been about our national defense. One quick thing, I think you have a question. I was surprised Larry didn't jump in. I don't want us to run out of time, but you know, you were talking about not joining the military. Well, we have a different thing. I don't know if we want to bring that up right now, but yeah, we're very much, Larry's been following this. He mentioned about General Leach a few minutes ago. He's been following this real closely about the draft and about even drafting women. And now it used to be you had to go and sign up. Now they're making it automatic. There's still a big argument right now whether or not, you know, women will be included in that. Okay.
Very first thing that will happen, should we get into a really big shooting war with China or Russia, which is looking more likely every day that goes by, the very first thing that will happen when the government belatedly declares a draft and doesn't include women, the first man drafted is going to bring a lawsuit, and it's going to go straight to the Supreme Court. And we're going to be sitting here trying to figure out whether or not women really are equal or not. But I will tell you this, I've been all across the country in all 50 states in the last 15 years. And if I want to get a grandmother or a mother to come across the balustrade in front of the stage and beat me about the head and ears, all I have to do is suggest I'm going to draft their daughters. So, going to be a real political battle if we ever do have to go back to conscription.
Lori, can we do 2 more questions? Okay, all right, 'cause I saw some hands. Well, let me get Medea. Oh, you got one second, Medea? Okay. Who has the mic?
Hi, thank you both for being here today. So, as so many in the U.S. are calling for...
Could you speak a little louder? I know you're on the mic.
Yeah, as so many in the U.S. are calling for justice in U.S. actions in the Middle East, and we have many veterans of U.S. Middle Eastern wars. I'm personally from a military town, and I know of veterans who look back at these wars, and some have very negative views of the wars, some say, and then some that still say, oh, this was for justice, this was to spread freedom and democracy. So how do we effectively support and engage with the veterans across the spectrum who we, the U.S., in your words, used as pawns?
Okay, what is your question again? I want to make sure we follow you.
How do we effectively support and engage with the veterans who we, as the U.S., set off to these wars, especially when these veterans have vastly different views about what these wars were about?
Let me just say one quick thing, okay? And this is what I've learned, and you're finding more veterans that are realizing this. I talk to veterans all the time. It's been my life. You have to understand one thing. When we come into the military, we're indoctrinated. I don't mean that negative, but we are. You know, we believe everything our leaders tell us. You know, our job is to salute, follow orders as long as they're not illegal or supposedly unethical, but a lot of that happens. And so it is hard until you step back and take a look and say, man, you know, what were we doing at the time? Because when you're in the middle of that, the only thing you're thinking about, unfortunately, is training for war. And you don't realize, and it takes some time to decompress from that. And you're finding more of that, and that's why Larry and I speak out. We're giving you permission to speak out. That's why I'm willing to do that. That's why I'm willing to put myself out there. Because I'm giving you permission. It's okay, because guess what? The guy that supports Larry and I, you know, financially in the Eisenhower Media Network, we bring credibility because we got the t-shirt to prove it. You know, we spent 28 years in the military. Half my life has been in the Pentagon. Half my life, whether a civilian or militarily. Larry, his entire life has been in the military.
There are some really alarming statistics out there if you consider the fact that we might, at one point, actually have to defend ourselves.
Right.
The statistics are things like the propensity to serve amongst the 18 to 24-year-old group in America, and think about what they're thinking about in order to arrive at this propensity, is the lowest it's ever been in the polling for the past 40 years. 9%. 9%. Here's another one. All the services, except the Marine Corps, missed their goals the last 2 fiscal years in recruiting. Another one, families like my own and like Dennis's and like some of yours that are military oriented, serve themselves, uncle, grandfather, brother, sister, whatever, are now almost across the board recommending to their young people that they know or are close to, do not serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. These statistics, should we ever have to fight, and let me tell you, we are looking right now because of the bad leadership in this country at possibly having to fight, and maybe even nuclear weapons being used, we're lost. We're done.
Let me make a comment, though. Now, I heard some claps, going on, but let me just say this. Understand, we need a military. Okay, yeah, no, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that because of the fact that we do have some bad people out there that could come about. Well, yeah. Who said that? Oh, yeah, but listen. There may be a time that we may have to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and we're not talking about the leadership. We're not talking about Donald Trump.
All
Joe
right,
Biden,
folks. I know we have a lot of emotions.
We're talking about you, the citizens of this country.
Do we want me to do it? Do we want it? All right.
Thank you. Does it
Okay, yeah. And
does it matter if it's Republicans or Democrats in the White House? What you're saying? Is there any party that's better than the other party as it comes to the issues that you're talking about?
Doesn't make a bit of difference. Doesn't make a bit of difference.
yeah.
Served them both. Bill
I-
Clinton was one of the worst presidents in the history of this country
Hear, hear.
for war making.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton was just as bad. Madeleine Albright was just as bad. They never met a tyrant they didn't want to use your army, my boys and girls, to kill.
Until I started studying it, I thought it was all Republicans, especially the neocons. But the people, Madeleine Albright was a neocon. Victoria Nuland, who was in the State Department and a Democratic, neocon. So he crossed borders in both parties. So, But let me just say one thing, Andy, and I told some folks this in New York. If you want to change this, I'll give you the classic example right now. Each and every one of you, even some of my friends ask me, what can we do to change this? July the 24th, you got some guy coming in here. He went behind Obama's back doing an Iran nuclear deal. You got a guy by the name of Bibi Netanyahu is coming before our Congress to speak against our current president and our country. He's a crook himself. So if you want to make a difference, and I've been challenging everybody, those of us in the black community, we did a million-man march one time, so the precedents have been set. So on July 24th, we all need to be in Washington, D.C. in the masses if you want to make a difference.
One last question. I'm going to hand it then to Medea to take the last question, unless somebody else. But I wanted to ask you about accountability. These stories are great, and we hear this. And what's your take on how can we hold these people accountable to these crimes that they've committed, treasonous crimes that caused, like you said, the death of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of others. Unfortunately, a lot of these things come out after the fact, but there's no follow-up about, going back and holding people accountable, I love seeing Trump in jail, but he's being held for something rather trivial compared to what this stuff that you're talking about. So can you speak a little bit about accountability?
I'll say one thing about it that really gnaws at me. It's our fault. This whole situation is our fault. Mine, yours, everyone else in this room, everyone in Washington.
It's more your fault than mine, because I wasn't in the government.
Yeah, well, It's your fault that the republic has been lost. I'm 80 years old, and I think I will live long enough to see the republic go down. That's a sad commentary, but it's been lost. And why has it been lost? Because we, the American people, not necessarily you, but we, the American people, have let it be lost. We've elected these bastards over and over and over again.
I can give you a personal. I knew it was going to be a hard shot, but I ran against Steny Hoyer because of the fact I hate career politicians. I hate them. They stay in office just for themselves, But guess what? We continue to vote for them. You know why? Based on name recognition. That's all. The American people. Say again?
He's in Israel right now. It's his 21st delegation that he's taken to Israel, 21 times.
Yeah. And how many times has he gone to his own district and addressed his own people?
Exactly.
And look, and that's why I ran, because I told him we never see it. He doesn't have to because of the fact name recognition. That's not, we voted. For those of us in District 5, we voted him in every time. That's why I ran. I knew it was going to be tough, but because of the fact he's a career politician, and guess what? He gets all this money from AIPAC.
Yeah. So you bring up in your book as well the AIPAC issue, but I wanted to ask both of you about the influence that you saw in your careers of the military-industrial complex. How much did that shape decisions to go to war? And thank you, Dennis, well, for writing the book, but for bringing up July 24th with Netanyahu here. If anybody wants to join us in Congress, we're going around to every office saying, will you boycott Netanyahu's visit? So far, we have 24 members of Congress who have agreed to boycott. And the more we go, the more we'll do that. So if you're interested in joining us, come and see me afterwards. I'll put you on the WhatsApp list, and we go every single day. You can go one day, you can go a couple of hours, whatever. But yes, the power of the military-industrial complex.
You know, when Eisenhower gave his speech that everyone remembers, his farewell address, and talked about the military-industrial complex, it was alarming enough, but he was going out the door. He said it's in every state house, in every federal office building. The influence is pernicious, and if we don't do something about it, we're going to lose our liberties. But he gave a speech in 1953 to the American Association of Newspaper Editors, where he said the same thing at the very beginning of his 8 years, and even more dramatically. He said, this is no true life at all. And he was talking about the Cold War and the military-industrial complex then blooming. This is no way of true life at all. It is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Well, we've been crucified. And you're absolutely right. When Lockheed Martin dictates the policy of this country, when Lockheed Martin makes billions of dollars every month off Ukraine, the war will never end in Ukraine. That's who's running this country now, along with their acolytes that media challenges every day in the Congress. And they're just criminals.
When we talk about disinformation and how they think they're fooling us, and some of us they are fooling. When you talk about the military-industrial complex, let's say, for instance, all the money we're providing to Ukraine for weapons, even Israel, they tell you it's creating jobs for the American people. It's going to the CEOs. It's not going to the American. Look, we're supposed to be the smartest and greatest country in the world. Let's find some other ways to make money. Let's do that. Well, listen, Laurie is having a fit back there. Okay.
We got one more, Dennis.
Okay.
Hey, first, David Johnson, retired Colonel, veteran, U.S.
Dr.
Army.
Johnson.
Good to see you, Dennis. And Larry, I have to commend you for your book, for stepping out and being able to open up and, be so candid on your views. But I have to say, as a former soldier, and I got a kid right now, a second lieutenant, that's already getting commissioned to go into the Army, and I have to be positive from my perspective, and I understand the political aspects and also the investment aspects of the corporate side, but when I look at the flag, I still have a lot of respect for the flag as a soldier and as a veteran. because the question you raised earlier about how does veterans see things, how do their spouses see things after they've deployed and come back, you know, and they have to take that flag. So I have to still support my flag and my military. I have a lot of respect for it. I've served over 32 years. And I want to say I've served with some great leaders. And I can see some good leaders out there right now. I look at C.Q. Brown. He is a leader for a leader to learn from. I'll look at Lloyd Austin. I remember when he was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and I worked in the G3. Have a lot of respect for former General Austin. So on the opposite side of that, I commend you for your book and I applaud you for being so candid, but I have to still support my flag and these youngsters because somebody's got to go out. We got to have people to fight wars. We got to have, and you've already said that, we got to have people to support this country. And we got to encourage our youngsters to get off the street and do something. If they're supporting the flag, it's better than getting in trouble. Yeah. So I just want to say that on my end. I applaud you, but I still say there's a good side of the military. And I'm so proud that I had an opportunity to serve, and I served with some of the best in the United States Army and also in the Air Force. Yeah. Okay?
Yes, I agree. Hey, Dr. Johnson, as I stated a few minutes ago, from a personal standpoint of view, I've traveled the world and I couldn't wait to get back to my United States of America. But that does not stop me from criticizing my United States of America. I served for 28 years and I can tell you right now, there are people in this room that I gave my heart and soul to in serving them. Okay? And so I agree with you 100%, but right now, what I'm trying to do is protect these men and women that you talked about, because I don't want them going to war on a lie. I don't want them to go into war on agenda where people are trying to make money, military-industrial complex, and because if you want to be candid right now, the war in Iraq and what's going on right now, whether you like it or not, is about Israel. And I don't like that. $3.7 billion, and they got control of our Congress. It used to be unpopular to say that. 15 years ago, only Larry and I could talk about it. I think he got censored. I'm sick of that. We need to tell it like it is. We're giving Israel $3.7 billion. And I don't like it, and I don't like our men and women dying for another country.
All right. And on that note, folks, thank you all so much for being a part of this more spirited than I thought it would be discussion. Let's go ahead and give a round of applause to Larry and Dennis, please, for sharing all of their expertise. And a big thank you to you all who made this event exactly what it was. Thank you. If you picked up a book and didn't pay for it, please come see me. We're doing an honor system. But if y'all did that, please come see me. Dennis, I think we're gonna have you stay up here to sign. I think we're gonna have you stay up here to sign because most people have already bought a copy.
Okay. Hey, can I go to the restroom first?
Huh? Yeah. So, folks, don't get up quite yet. Dennis got to go to the bathroom. He got to go get pretty for y'all. Give us a few minutes and the signing will start. Thank you all so much for coming to Busboys and Poets Books, and we hope you have a lovely Sunday. Thank you all.